Here's part four to the book Rasputin, A Tool of the Jews by Dr. Rudolph Kummer. And this part I think is very important because the chapters in here actually talk about Rasputin's, I don't know what you want to call it, conversion to the Jews, or where he finally decided to side with the Jews and do their bidding. And it talks about how they did it based on the Jews' admissions, Simonovich and whatnot. So, yeah, I'm not reading the whole thing, just due to time constraints, but you can pause and read everything. And again, I'll eventually have this up as a PDF on my Substack. I am going to read the last chapter of what I included here, which is about the French ambassador and his role in subverting Russia. And yeah, I'm going to be reading pages, I believe, 75 to like somewhere around 110. Well, I'm not reading, that's what's included here. Sorry. 75 to pages 110. So pause and read everything, and then I'm going to read that last chapter. So I'm just going to read this last chapter because I found this very interesting. The French ambassador, Paleologue, and the Jews. During the World War, France had a man as ambassador in St. Petersburg who was very interested in the internal affairs of the Russian Empire. His name was Maurice Paleologue. He also published his memoirs of his time as ambassador in St. Petersburg. These publications, which appeared under the title At the Tsar's Court During the World War, Diaries and Reflections, provide important insights into the Jewish question. Particularly striking for anyone concerned with the Jewish question is the fact that the French ambassador, who was also a hateful enemy of Germany, I wonder why, reported so often and in such detail on the situation of the Jews. And then he talks about how the Jews are, supposedly oppressed there. Top of the page two, that's what he's talking about. Um, and then on the bottom as well, just about how the Jews are so oppressed. And then it says, see, so against the awakening, I don't think autism is the right word. Maybe against the awakening spirit among the Russian people, Paleok addresses the following. And he said, at the same time, a reawakening of anti-Semitism. Or maybe that's what it is. Against the awakening of anti-Semitism among the Russian people, Paleok addresses the following. At the same time, a reawakening of anti-Semitism is spreading throughout the entire empire. When the Russian armies are defeated, it is naturally the fault of the Jews. The reactionary newspaper Volga wrote a few days ago, quote, the Russian people recognize who the enemy is. It is the Jew. No mercy for the Jew. Generation after generation, this goddamn people has been hated and despised by all. The blood of the sons of Holy Russia, which they betray daily, cries out for revenge. Unquote. One wonders that the French ambassador, of all people, is so concerned about the fate of the Jews in Russia, and one wonders that the same Mr. Paleok cannot find a word of sympathy for the suffering of the Russian people that the Russian people have to endure. The key to understanding this peculiar behavior lies, in this case as well, in knowledge of the race question. Maurice Paleok, the French ambassador, is of Jewish descent. Of course. This is not changed by the fact that he occasionally calls a notorious crook a crook. First, however, let a false report be corrected. Various publications have claimed that Maurice Paleolog's real name was Moses Braun and that he was descended from a Jew who immigrated from Austria to Paris. This information is false. In contrast, the files of the Austrian State Archives in Vienna provide the following exhaustive information. Quote, regarding Paleolog's ancestry, the imperial and royal ambassador Count Kevin Mueller reported the following on February 9th, 1907, on the occasion of Paleolog's dispatch as envoy to Sofia. Paleolog is the son of a Jew from Romania named Caesar Bolyak. This Bolyak played a peculiar and not entirely blameless role in the events of the Hungarian Revolution of 1848, right? The Jewish Marxist uprising of 1848 in Europe. According to material held in the Vienna archives, Bolyak is said to have received a number of diamonds from Kossuth during the Hungarian Revolution for delivery to Omer Pasha, but these never reached their destination. The son of this Jew, Bolyak, who was accused of grand theft, is the French ambassador, Maurice Paleolog, who managed to conceal his Jewish ancestry behind this name. The Jew, Maurice Paleolog, well, this Jew, Maurice Bolyak Paleolog, was also one of the worst encirclement politicians and warmongers complicit in the death of millions of people, right? So this Jew, who was pretending to represent France, but really represented the international Jew, was one of the Jews who was pushing the idea of encircling Germany. So, right, which the Germans talked about, Hitler and the National Socialists talked about from the 1920s up until the end of the war, or I guess until the war started. So, it was certainly no coincidence that in the decisive years of the World War, right, I believe the First World War, of course, right, a Jew represented the French Republic in Russia. A Jew who played a key role in making Russia an ally of France and England and drawing it into the war against Germany. As a Jew in disguise and representative of world Jewry, the French ambassador Bolyak Paleolog also very vigorously represented the interests of Judaism in Russia. He is primarily to be named as a witness to the attempts at interference and blackmail by world Jewry in Russia. In his memoir, he also addresses the relationship of the United States, i.e., American Jewry, to Russia, right? Because the Jews ruled America even during the First World War. At that time, Paleologue was very keen to finally persuade the United States to actively intervene in the World War on the side of the Entente powers. American Jewry, largely originating from Russia, initially refused, according to Paleologue's mediation, to march side by side with an anti Semitic Russia. For this reason, the Jew Paleologue devoted himself so thoroughly to the Jewish question in Russia and tried by all possible means to promote Jewish interests in Russia, whether in dealing with representatives of Russian society or with Russian politicians. Bolyak Paleologue strove everywhere to pursue Jewish policies. He even tried to influence the Russian foreign minister Sazonov to adopt a pro-Jewish policy. Um, Particularly revealing in this regard is his report of October 28th, 1914. Quote, occasionally, Sazonov and I discuss the Jewish question and all the religious, political, social, and economic problems that arise from it. He informs me that the imperial government is concerned with mitigating measures by which the overly arbitrary and oppressive legislation that burdens the Russian Jews could be amended. Moreover, a new decree will be issued for the Galatian Jews, who will now be subjects of the Tsar. I encourage him to show himself to be as tolerant and liberal as possible. Continuing, I speak to you as an ally. In the United States live a large number of very wealthy, very influential Jews who are deeply outraged by the fate you are inflicting on their fellow Jews. Germany is very skillfully exploiting this resentment against you and, consequently, against us as well. Now, however, we have a great interest in maintaining the goodwill of the Americans. As further proof, consider the following conversation he had with the trusted aide of the Russian foreign minister, Sazonov, named Neratov. Quote, Russia could do much to remove the last hesitation of the American public and finally win them over to our cause. Quote, what could we do? I don't quite see it. It would suffice if you were to soften your legislation concerning the Jews somewhat. The effect in America would be very significant. Neratov resists and says, quote, to touch the Jewish question during war, impossible. You would have the whole country against you, and that would be tremendously damaging to the alliance. For be assured that our far right party would immediately accuse France and England of having secretly supported the demands of the Jews. We return to current affairs. The Jewish question weighs heavily on relations between Russia and the US. I have often discussed it with my American colleagues, Mayor Francis's predecessor. There are hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Boston, industrious and intelligent, prosperous and influential. They maintain in the United States hatred of Tsarism. Unquote. It is perfectly clear from this conversation that the French ambassador tried by all means to gain advantages for his fellow Jews, that he thereby interfered improperly in the domestic politics of an allied friendly people was no obstacle for him. Paleologue, a bitter enemy of Rasputin, acted in his post according to the instructions of world Jewry, just as Simonovich, on the other hand, saw and misused Rasputin according to higher instructions for purely Jewish purposes. Thus, throughout Russia, Judaism had its accomplices and secret agents who, although outwardly in separate, even hostile camps, nevertheless worked according to uniform principles and instructions. So that last part is incredibly important to understand. The Jews try to control all sides. They try to control the opposition. That is what they did here, what they were trying to do. As I mentioned in the videos, I read they even infiltrated the white Russians who were opposing the Bolsheviks, and I have to try to find that again, and I'll get that on video. And but we see that here in America in 2025, all the way back to this time period. The Jews infiltrate everything, and then they pretend to be anti-Jew, they pretend to be white, they pretend to be Christian, and then they subvert. When the time is right, they take their mask off, and then the movement they subverted is destroyed. So, um, or they may use one movement to try to destroy another movement, right? So that is actively trying to oppose the Jews. So they're just incredibly evil. So anyway, that's all I got. These were the first two parts. I forgot to include the third part, but Go check them out as well. So.